Brisbane's Olympic countdown clock is now officially ticking. With exactly 6 years until the opening ceremony, the first designs for the National Aquatic Centre have been revealed, but only one major venue construction contract has been awarded so far. Also, there are calls for the state government to buy Airtrain and cut airport fares to 50 cents. I've examined a decade of the operator's financial reports to see what they tell us about its revenue, tax and potential value. And Brisbane unit prices have fallen for the first time in 3 years as evidence of a broader property slowdown continues to build. All of this and more is coming up in this Greater Brisbane update. Thanks to quality local businesses AppWizard, creators of Royalty Rewards, and YB Painting Services for making these videos possible through their support. I'm Adam and this is the Brisbane channel, where we take the time to unpack the stories that impact Greater Brisbane now and into the future beyond the headlines. Let's get updated. July the 23rd marked exactly 6 years until the opening ceremony of the 2032 Olympic Games, and just over 5 years since Brisbane was confirmed the host. After years of venue changes, reviews and political reversals, this is a useful point to take stock of what is now moving forward, what remains unresolved, and how much still needs to happen. One highly visible sign of the countdown is now sitting in Queen Street Mall. Brisbane has unveiled a giant digital Omega clock 6 years out from the Games, considerably earlier than the countdown clocks used by several recent host cities. Beijing's appeared approximately 4 years out, London's marked the final 500 days, while those for Paris and Milano Cortina arrived about a year beforehand. A larger bespoke Brisbane-themed version is expected 1 year before the event. But while the clock is symbolic, this week also brought something more substantial, our first official look at the proposed National Aquatic Centre. The preliminary design features a flowing roofline intended to reflect the movement of water and wind. The centre will be built at the heritage-listed Centenary Pool Complex in Spring Hill, beside the planned Olympic Stadium at Victoria Park. For the first time, we also know the design team, Arm Architecture and NH Architecture, working with Queensland firm Arcafield and aquatic specialists Liquid Blue. Their previous work includes Perth's RAC Arena, Melbourne Park, the Sydney Opera House Concert Hall redevelopment, South Banks River Quay, and several Queensland aquatic centres. The proposal includes main and secondary arenas with large pools, along with a gym, high-performance facilities, and office space. The government says it will complement existing outdoor pools and respect the heritage-listed parts of Centenary Pool. However, the render doesn't show enough to establish exactly what will be retained, altered, or demolished. Centenary Pool is expected to have its final day of operation on the 30th of August before the Games Infrastructure Authority takes possession on the 1st of September. Early works are expected to begin from that point, although the full construction timetable hasn't been announced. 4 builders are currently shortlisted, with the final contractor expected to be selected in early 2027. Geica's ambition is to have the centre completed at least 1 year before the Games, but Simon Crooks says it is still too early to confirm a completion date. There is also uncertainty over spectator capacity. The 2032 delivery plan promised more than 25,000 seats during the Games, reducing to about 8,000 in legacy mode. Reports this week suggested some temporary seating could be removed to contain costs within the fixed $7.1 billion venue budget. Deputy Premier Jared Blay would not confirm whether the capacity would be reduced. Geica Chief Executive Simon Crooks said the official figure remained unchanged, while also acknowledging that the project was still being tested for value for money. Crooks says the design remains flexible and that savings identified on one venue could potentially be reinvested elsewhere in the program. So more than 25,000 remains the current figure, but it may not be the final one. The Aquatic Centre's individual budget has also not been released. Geica says disclosing it during procurement could weaken its negotiating position, although that also prevents the public from seeing how much of the overall venue budget is being allocated to it. Premier David Crisafulli says individual costs will eventually be disclosed as projects are delivered, but hasn't provided a timetable for that disclosure. Some existing tenants reportedly hadn't received formal details about their departure or compensation when the designs were unveiled. The Deputy Premier says affected tenants will be compensated, but that the timing and the amount are matters for Brisbane City Council. This is meaningful progress. We have the first designs, the design team, a handover date, and a process to select the builder. But it remains a preliminary vision rather than a construction-ready design, with important questions about capacity, cost, heritage, and timing still open. I've put questions to the department seeking clarification on several of those points. I had not received a response by the time of recording, but I'll include any substantive response in a future update. The wider venue program is at a similar stage. At estimates, Simon Crooks confirmed that one major venue construction contract had been awarded so far, initial earthworks for Brisbane Stadium. Smaller contracts have been issued for archaeological, geotechnical and piling work, while other major packages remain in tendering, planning or validation. 7 new venues are planned and 10 will be upgraded, with the Queensland Audit Office indicating much of the work will be completed in 2030 or 2031. That doesn't mean the program is already late. Major projects require lengthy decision, approval and procurement phases, and Brisbane 2032 President Andrew Liveris says 6 years is perfectly fine in construction terms. But concentrating so much work towards the end of the decade reduces the time available to absorb delays. A draft master plan showing how Brisbane Stadium, the National Aquatic Centre and the Brisbane Showgrounds will operate together is expected soon. It will cover games and legacy use along with connections to trains, buses and surrounding roads. That will be important because the renders released so far largely show individual buildings in isolation. The venues and transport network will need to function as one system. I spoke with transport engineer David Hayward about the potential legacy in the Brisbane Channel's latest podcast, and I'll link that on screen at the end of this video. Olympic construction will also overlap with major hospital, housing and transport projects across Queensland. The Audit Office has warned about workforce constraints. Construction Skills Queensland's latest forecast estimates an average shortfall of approximately 19,100 construction workers over the next 7 years, peaking to as many as 35,000 in 2027-28. That peak is lower than the 50,000 worker shortfall projected in its previous forecast because building and engineering activity is now expected to peak at different times. But the pressure is expected to persist for longer, creating continued risks for project costs and delivery. The government has responded with incentives covering 2,500 apprenticeships through the new Tradie Start program, plus another 2,000 through an extension of the Small Business Apprenticeship program. A small business employing its first apprentice could receive $10,000, plus another $4,000 if the apprentice is over 21. An additional $2,000 is available when the apprentice comes from a priority group, including veterans, women, people with disability, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Support is also available to larger employers and group training organisations in specified circumstances. These programs won't immediately produce experienced tradespeople or project managers, but with 6 years until the Games and a longer infrastructure pipeline beyond them, expanding the local workforce is part of the response. Another unresolved question is what the Games will cost to operate. This is separate from the $7.1 billion venue program. The infrastructure budget pays for permanent venues, while the operational budget covers staging the event, including temporary facilities, security, technology, and athlete transport. The operational budget was estimated at $4.9 billion in 2021. Andrew Liveris has since said the figure bears no resemblance to reality. Olympics Minister Tim Manders says the final cost remains flexible while the sports program and some venue arrangements are settled. His objective is that any increase be covered through sponsorship, ticket sales and other private revenue rather than Queensland taxpayers. A Commonwealth Bank sponsorship has reportedly been valued at around $200 million, with more commercial agreements being pursued. The sports program and the allocation of sports to venues are expected to be finalised later this year. The organising committee will then prepare a new bottom-up operating budget for its board and the IOC next year. Liveris says approximately 50 sponsors will be needed to provide around 1/3 of the operating budget. Around 24 discussions with potential sponsors are currently underway. That provides a clearer pathway, but not yet a guaranteed funding result. Until the budget and sponsorship agreements are finalised, the Queensland Government could ultimately be required to cover a shortfall. There has also been discussion about increasing capacity at some venues to sell more tickets. That could increase operating revenue where demand is strong, but it's important not to mix the budgets together. Ticket income helps stage the games. It doesn't add money to the separate government-funded venue program. If extra seating also makes a venue more expensive to build, the additional infrastructure cost would need to be weighed up against the potential ticket revenue and the venue's usefulness after 2032. In Rockhampton, Andrew Liveris says there are currently no red lights over the proposed rowing venue, but river flow and the ability to provide a full-length fair course remains yellow lights under investigation. We examined those issues in detail in last week's update, so I'll link that video at the end of this one for anyone wanting the broader background. The state government has also released a sporting strategy intended to extend the 2032 legacy beyond major venues and elite competition. Queensland Spirit, the Road to 2032, covers grassroots infrastructure, participation, sporting organisations and athlete pathways. It also includes a sport attraction and investment fund intended to bring more sporting bodies and major events to Queensland. It includes new club grants, continued $200 sport vouchers, learn to swim vouchers of up to $150 for eligible children, and a new grassroots to gold talent program. The strategy followed almost 2,000 survey responses, more than 90 written submissions and community forums around Queensland. However, it is described as the first stage of the plan, and the announcement doesn't provide an overall budget, funding amounts for most initiatives, or firm delivery dates. So it establishes the government's direction, but further announcements will be needed before we can assess the scale of the investment or what individual clubs will receive. The state government isn't the only level of government attempting to define what the Olympics legacy will look like. Brisbane City Council has released its own legacy plan containing 21 initiatives intended to deliver benefits before, during and after the Games. Some are major city-shaping ambitions. Council wants to help unlock an estimated 50,000 new homes close to high-frequency public transport and inner-city venues by 2032. The word unlock is important. This doesn't mean Council itself is committing to build 50,000 homes. It refers to using planning changes, infrastructure and partnerships to enable additional private and public development. The plan also supports expanding Brisbane Metro, although the routes, funding and delivery timetable for that expansion remain matters involving the state and federal governments as well as Council. Another proposal is a green and gold grid of shaded walking and cycling connections between venues, neighbourhoods and popular destinations. Council also wants to investigate on-demand commercial water taxis using public river hubs, filling some of the gaps between existing ferry services. The concept has been described as Uber for the river, although it remains a proposal to work through with private operators, not a confirmed new council service. Other ideas include the Low Line, which would transform underused space beneath the railway between South Brisbane and West End, a 52-kilometre wilderness trail connecting Mount Cootha with Dagwala, however you want to say it, National Park, suburban live sites, a pride house during the Games, and a volunteering passport intended to connect local volunteers with future Games roles. There's even a program proposed to train Brisbane content creators to help present the city to the world. Central to the plan is a new Brisbane Legacy Partnerships program. It would provide businesses and community organisations with a clearer pathway to propose projects and work with Council, building on partnership models previously used at places such as Howard Smith Wharves and Fish Lane. The plan followed a consultation process that generated over 2,000 ideas and almost 20,000 public votes. But like the state government's sporting strategy, this is currently more of a framework than a fully funded delivery schedule. Many initiatives rely on support from other government levels or investment from the private sector, and the plan doesn't provide a project-by-project budget or completion date. Brisbane Labor has also questioned how much of it is genuinely new. Council opposition leader Jared Cassidy described the plan as a collection of reheated announcements and criticised the absence of a specific affordable housing commitment within the target for 50,000 additional homes. He also argued that several major transport ambitions still depend on funding from the state and federal governments. So the legacy plan identifies the kind of city council wants Brisbane to become by 2032 and beyond, but its success will depend on which ideas attract funding, partners, and firm delivery commitments over the next 6 years. And not everyone is enthusiastic about the direction the games are taking. As the official countdown clock was unveiled in Queen Street Mall, opponents of the Victoria Park Stadium plans held what they called an Olympics money-burning barbecue outside Queensland Parliament. The event used a mock Olympic barbecue and prop money to argue that public funding should instead be directed towards services such as health, transport, and education. The organisers also opposed the use of Victoria Park, or Barrambin, for major sporting venues, arguing the land should remain public open space. Separately, Games Watchdog 2032 has asked Federal Environment Minister Murray Watt to reconsider the decision that the Victoria Park precinct is not a controlled action under federal environmental law. I'll return to that in On My Radar, because assessing the group's new scientific claims requires more than just repeating a media release. The group says newly compiled research raises questions about groundwater feeding York's Hollow, the relationship between that water and old trees in the park, and how the project's environmental impacts were assessed. Those are claims made by the advocacy group and haven't yet been established through a new federal assessment. They involve detailed scientific and legal questions that deserve closer examination than I can provide in this update. I'm retaining that material for a possible standalone investigation, including responses from the relevant authorities and independent experts. What is clear at the 6-year mark is that Brisbane has moved beyond debating whether it will host the Games. Design teams are being appointed, procurement is underway, and early construction has begun. But many of the most consequential details, including individual venue costs, final capacities, the operational budget, and how several legacy ambitions will be funded, are still being worked out. The countdown clock therefore marks two things at once: progress toward 2032 and a steadily shrinking amount of time available to resolve what remains uncertain. Before we move from what Brisbane is building for 2032 to one of the more unusual arrangements already shaping our transport network, a quick thanks to AppWizard, creators of Royalty Rewards. If you run a local business, you'll know that attracting new customers can be difficult and expensive. Sometimes the biggest opportunity is simply encouraging the customers you already have to come back more often. That's where Royalty Rewards comes in. It's a Brisbane-developed digital loyalty platform designed to help local businesses reward repeat customers and build stronger relationships with the people already walking through their doors. Rather than try to explain everything here, I've put together a short video that walks through exactly how it works, along with details of the current free trial opportunities available for businesses that get involved early. You'll find the link in the description below, and even if you don't own a business yourself, if there's a local cafe, salon, tradie, or other small business owner in your life who you think could benefit from something like this, feel free to send it their way. And from helping local businesses keep their customers coming back, let's turn to the considerably more complicated business behind Brisbane's airport railway. Queensland Greens MP Michael Berkman is calling on the state government to acquire Airtrain, bring fares down to 50 cents, and increase services from every 30 minutes to every 15. Airtrain is privately operated under a concession that runs until 2036, when the airport rail link is due to transfer to the state without compensation. Until then, Airtrain sets its own fares and sits outside Queensland's 50-cent public transport network. A standard one-way ticket currently costs $23.30. Berkman argues the government should offer approximately $45 million to acquire the concession early. The Greens have also accused Airtrain's British owner of using related party financing arrangements to avoid paying Australian corporate tax. Now, the next part gets a little technical, but I think the detail matters here. Tax expenses, cash tax payments, and company financing are not all the same thing, and reducing everything to a single headline could leave you with the wrong impression. So rather than watering it down, let's work through what the accounts actually show. I went through 10 years of consolidated financial reports filed by Airtrain's parent company, USS Axel. Across the 10 reporting years ending in March 2025, the accounts record approximately $193.4 million in cumulative fare revenue. But none of the 10 cash flow statements separately records a cash income tax payment during that period. That needs an important qualification. No cash tax payment is not necessarily the same as there being no tax expense or evidence by itself of unlawful tax avoidance. The latest accounts say the group held approximately $69.6 million in carried forward tax losses. These losses can potentially be used to offset taxable profits, subject to Australia's tax rules. But there is also a complicated financing structure behind the company. In September 2016, a loan from its British parent, Universities Superannuation Scheme Limited, was replaced with redeemable preference shares. At March 2025, those shares were recorded as a liability of $30.96 million, together with an accrued redemption premium of almost $18.95 million. That is a combined liability approaching $50 million. The accounts also recorded more than $2.18 million in finance costs associated with those preference shares during the latest reporting year. The shares were due to mature in September 2025. The accounts say the parent company had applied to subscribe for ordinary shares equal to the redemption liability, but do not tell us what ultimately occurred when the maturity date arrived. One figure that deserves some caution is the proposed $45 million buyback price. The latest accounts valued the service concession intangible asset at approximately $50.12 million. But that is an accounting carrying value, not necessarily what the concession would fetch in a negotiated sale. Any actual acquisition price could depend on the remaining revenue, operating costs, contractual rights and liabilities, as well as what each side believes the exclusive concession is worth before it expires in 2036. Brisbane Airport's 2026 master plan says Airtrain accounted for only about 5% of airport passenger ground transport trips in 2024. That raises a legitimate policy question ahead of the Olympics, whether a direct airport railway should remain a comparatively expensive, privately operated service when every other journey on the TransLink network, apart from Airtrain, costs 50 cents. But it also raises financial questions about how much an early acquisition would really cost, and how much taxpayers would then need to contribute to operate a cheaper and more frequent service. I put detailed questions to Airtrain covering the figures in its accounts, the related party financing arrangements, the proposed government acquisition, patronage, and the call for 50-cent fares. Airtrain responded to those questions but declined to comment. That means the company has not confirmed or disputed the figures drawn from its financial reports, nor explained its position on the proposed acquisition or fare changes. The absence of a response doesn't establish whether the Greens' allegations are correct, it simply means those claims, and the questions raised by Airtrain's own accounts, remain unanswered. From the cost of reaching the airport to the increasingly extraordinary cost of owning a piece of Greater Brisbane. After several years of rapid growth, there is now clearer evidence that Brisbane's property market is losing momentum. Domain's house price report for the June quarter shows the median unit price across Greater Brisbane fell by 1.2%, or approximately $9,500 to just over $790,000. That was Brisbane's first quarterly decline in unit prices for 3 years and its weakest quarterly result in 6 years. House prices didn't fall across the quarter, but they came close to standing still. The median increased by just 0.4%, or a little over $5,000 to approximately $1.21 million. That was the weakest quarterly increase in 6 years after 13 consecutive quarters of growth. So describing this as a slowdown is justified. Describing it as a property crash would not be. Despite the weaker quarter, Brisbane house prices remain 16.4% higher than they were 1 year ago, while units are still up 15.4%. That means the typical house has gained approximately $170,000 over the past year, and the typical unit has gained more than $105,000. It also means that for buyers, a small quarterly fall does very little to reverse the loss of affordability created by the preceding boom. The change in direction is being attributed to a combination of weaker borrowing capacity, cost of living pressures, and greater choice for buyers. The Reserve Bank has increased the cash rate 3 times this year, taking it from 3.6 to 4.35%. Those increases have largely flowed through to mortgage rates, reducing how much prospective buyers can borrow and increasing repayments for existing borrowers. At the same time, the number of Brisbane homes listed for sale was reportedly 24% higher than 1 year earlier, the strongest annual increase since 2011. That doesn't necessarily mean owners are being forced to sell. Agents quoted in the reporting said they were not seeing widespread distressed listings. But properties appear to be taking longer to sell, allowing the available stock to accumulate and giving buyers more opportunity to negotiate. There are also signs that units have weakened before houses because investors have become more cautious. Domain's chief economist Nicola Powell linked that retreat to higher interest rates, living costs, and changes affecting the taxation of property investment. But it is difficult to isolate one cause from a single quarter of sales, particularly when first home buyers and owner-occupiers are also responding to the same economic uncertainty. But the slowdown is not evenly distributed across Greater Brisbane. In the Logan Beaudesert statistical region, unit prices reportedly fell 5.6% over the quarter to a median of $652,000. In Brisbane's Western statistical region, which includes areas such as Indooroopilly, Toowong and Moggill, house prices fell 4.1%, while units declined 4.5%. Meanwhile, some individual suburbs are still recording very strong annual growth. Callum Vale's median house price was reportedly up 44.1% over the year to $1.1 million. Local median prices can move sharply depending on the number and type of homes sold, so those suburb-level figures need to be treated with some caution. But they reinforce the point that this is becoming a more fragmented market rather than every part of Greater Brisbane moving together. As mentioned on the Brisbane channel recently, some forecasts have suggested Brisbane could become Australia's most expensive capital for units within the next year. That could still happen, particularly if prices fall more quickly in Sydney, but this latest result is a useful reminder that forecasts are not guarantees, especially when interest rates and buyer confidence are changing rapidly. For prospective buyers, the immediate benefit is greater choice and potentially more negotiating power, but cheaper purchase prices do not automatically mean more affordable housing when mortgage rates are higher and the median Brisbane home still costs considerably more than it did 12 months ago. The boom does appear to have lost momentum. Whether this becomes a sustained fall or simply a pause after several years of extraordinary growth will become clearer over the next few quarters. While the wider property market may be slowing, maintaining and improving the home you already own remains a priority for many people. And that brings me to channel sponsor YB Painting Services. If you're looking for a quality painting service, the multi-award winning team offers fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on their work, so you know exactly what you're getting up front. You can claim your discount by scanning the QR code on screen or through the link in the description. And while we're talking about homes, the next one is difficult to understand through ordinary prices or property comparisons. One of southeast Queensland's most distinctive homes, the Bubble House at Karalee, has returned to the market, although it now looks very different from the home that attracted international attention 6 years ago. The house at 79 Eleanor Way consists of 11 interconnected concrete domes overlooking the Brisbane River. Architect Graham Birchall and his wife Sharon began building it in 1983, inspired by work Graham had completed for his university architecture thesis. The project continued evolving for approximately 30 years. Its roughly 1,050 square metres of internal space includes 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a media room, office, library, bar and wine cellar. Almost everything follows the building's curves, including a circular kitchen created with the assistance of a boat builder and carpenter. The iris-style external shutters were inspired by a mechanism Birchall remembered seeing on a NASA Mars rover. NASA sent him drawings, although he ultimately devised his own solution. The couple placed the property on the market in 2020 while planning a sea change. It attracted considerable interest from prospective buyers in Australia and overseas, but its unusual design also made it extremely difficult to value, and it ultimately failed to sell. 6 years later, it's back on the market, but the photographs show a building that has deteriorated significantly. Carpets have been removed, much of the interior has been stripped back, and vegetation is growing across parts of the domed roof. The current listing gives particular prominence to the property's 5,109 square metre riverfront block, as well as the architectural history of the house. There's no advertised price guide, and the property is scheduled to go on auction on site at 2 p.m. on Saturday the 15th of August. Whoever ends up buying it will be taking on a property with a remarkable architectural history, and if the house is to be restored, a substantial project. Either way, this is more than just another property listing. Buildings like this contribute something less measurable to a city and region. Curiosity, character, and a sense not everything needs to look like everything else. The bubble house may divide opinion, but nobody could reasonably accuse it of being generic. Before we look at the stories I have my eye on, a quick reminder that local sponsors help make these updates possible, but viewers do as well. If you find the coverage useful and would like to help make sure it can continue, you can become a channel member or make a one-off contribution through Buy Me a Coffee. The links are in the description and the Buy Me a Coffee QR code is on screen now. Every bit of support helps me spend more time researching and covering the stories shaping Greater Brisbane. And now, here's what's on my radar. One story I deliberately held from this update concerns Queensland's public housing behaviour policy. The number of households evicted under the policy reached 122 during its first full financial year, roughly 3 times the previous year's figure, raising questions about both its effectiveness and what happens to the people who lose their homes. The Housing Department has asked to provide its response on Monday, so I've decided to wait and examine the issue properly once that information arrives. I'll also be taking a closer look at a request from Games Watchdog 2032 for the Federal Environment Minister to reconsider the environmental approval process for the proposed Victoria Park Olympic venues. The group says new research concerning groundwater, waterways and old trees at Barrambin materially contradicts information used in initial federal assessment. Those are substantial claims, but establishing whether they affect the legal environmental decision requires examining the underlying reports, GEICA's referral documents, and the relevant federal test, not simply repeating the claims from a media release. That investigation is better suited to a dedicated report, and I'm beginning to assemble the documents needed for that. The department and GEICA have also been asked for further details about the National Aquatic Centre, and the draft master plan showing how the Stadium Aquatic Centre Brisbane Showgrounds and surrounding transport connections will operate together is also expected soon. If any of those responses or documents provide meaningful new information, I'll bring that to you in a future update. And to finish this round of updates, one of Brisbane's oldest railway stations is about to welcome passengers again. Shorncliffe Station will reopen on Monday the 27th of July after being closed since November for restoration and accessibility works. The station was built in 1897, originally under the name Sandgate Station, as a destination for people travelling to the Bayside for holidays and day trips. The Heritage Station building has now been restored to its 1914 footprint, its existing awning has been restored, and a Second World War era air raid shelter has also been preserved. At the same time, Queensland Rail has raised 90 metres of the platform at boarding points and installed an accessible entrance ramp, toilet and ticket windows. There are also tactile ground indicators, hearing augmentation loops, upgraded lighting and CCTV, new seating and improved passenger information. Restoration was more complicated than originally expected. Early investigations uncovered structural problems, along with more than 900 historical objects beneath the station, including old tickets, bottles, clothing and newspapers dating back as far as the 1890s. Some of those discoveries have been donated to the Sandgate Museum, while others will be displayed inside the restored station. Compared with many of the infrastructure projects we discuss here, this one is a relatively small one, but it's a good example of how an old piece of Brisbane can be made more accessible and useful without erasing the history that made it distinctive in the first place. Earlier in the video, I mentioned I'd link the latest podcast, as well as last week's update, which included a look at the current situation with the proposed Olympic rowing venue. I'll see you there, 'cause we're done.